It came on a Thursday. No warning, no explanation. Just a short, stamped envelope handed to Captain Ibrahim Traoré by a courier who wouldn't meet his eyes. Inside, a transfer order. Location, Western Depot 9. Duty, night security detail. No briefing, no map, just coordinates. When he arrived, the scene was almost insulting. A rusting metal shed, standing alone in the middle of a dusty lot surrounded by chain-link fence and silence. No barracks, no radio tower, not even a working floodlight. It was a ghost post. One corporal, barely old enough to shave, greeted him with a sheepish grin. "Sir, I think they forgot to tell you. There's nothing here." Traoré didn't flinch. He'd seen enough games. That evening, while soldiers laughed and drank back at headquarters, Traoré paced the perimeter in silence. His boots stirred red dust that hadn't been touched in weeks. At midnight, a black truck rolled past the fence. Headlights off. No insignia. No license plate. It didn't stop. Didn't signal. Didn't return. Traoré didn't sleep that night. He started documenting everything. 2 days later, whispers began swirling through the base. There was a weapons leak from the Western Armory. Millions in munitions. Gone. Somebody's getting court-martialed. By the fourth day, Traoré heard his name, loud, clear, from a smirking lieutenant who passed him in the hall. "Guess you should have locked the shed tighter, Captain." It was a setup. Someone, maybe many, had planned it. Send him to a dead post. Move weapons elsewhere. Pin it all on the naive officer who still believed in chain of command. Let him take the fall, quietly, cleanly. But they underestimated him. Again. Instead of pleading innocence or writing reports no one would read, Traoré went to work. He retraced tire tracks, took time-stamped photos, planted a cheap recorder near the north fence, and most importantly, he made copies. Of everything. He didn't send them to his superiors. He sent them far beyond, to someone who actually listened. And in the silence of that dusty shed, while his enemies thought he'd already been buried, Ibrahim Traoré was digging. Not his grave, but theirs. The truck came again on the 7th night. Same path, same silence. But this time, Traoré was ready. Hidden beneath a camouflage tarp 50 meters from the northern fence, he held a second-hand night vision scope. No backup, no weapon drawn, just eyes and a notepad. 3 men stepped out. They didn't wear uniforms, but they walked like they had. One lit a cigarette, another made a phone call. Traoré noted everything. Voices, accents, the license plate this time visible for 2 seconds when the rear lights flashed red. Enough. The next morning, he sent a coded message to a contact he hadn't spoken to in 2 years. A former logistics officer now working with an independent anti-corruption cell. Need forensic review. Tracking unregistered movements. Full exposure risk. I trust no one else. Attached were timestamps, coordinates, and audio from the recorder planted days earlier. Within hours, he got a reply. "This goes higher than you think. Keep watching. We're pulling bank records now." Back at base, the air grew colder. Traoré noticed officers looking through him, not at him. One captain offered a false smile too wide. Another avoided him altogether. He wasn't being mocked anymore. He was being erased, removed from memos, left off patrol schedules, not included in briefing chains. It was a quiet purge. But Traoré stayed still. They thought he was stuck guarding rust and shadows. In truth, he was the only one standing in sunlight. A week later, the courier returned. Another envelope, This time not from command, but from the investigative cell. Inside, a list of serial numbers tied to vanished weapons, a string of wire transfers to offshore accounts, and one name at the very top. Colonel M. Diarra, the same man who had signed Traoré's transfer order. The same man who now spoke daily in public about tightening military integrity. Traoré closed the file. There it was. Proof. The mission wasn't just to humiliate him. It was to destroy his credibility. Before exposing the racket would be possible. He looked out at the barren lot outside the shed. To most, it was nothing. To him, it had become the center of a silent war. And now? He had the ammunition. Not the kind they smuggled. The kind that would burn reputations to ash. Traoré didn't march into headquarters. He didn't shout. He didn't demand an inquiry. Instead, he visited an old mechanic outside the base, a man who owed him nothing but remembered when Traoré once helped his son avoid a false charge. "Can you trace engine numbers if I give you photos?" The mechanic nodded. "If you bring me coffee." By nightfall, Traoré had confirmation. The trucks he'd seen came from a decommissioned motor pool, one supposedly shut down 3 years ago. And yet, those engines were running smoothly. Next, he made a stop at the rural outpost, where he knew fuel logs were still written by hand. Page after page showed discrepancies, fuel used but not recorded, logs erased and rewritten in a different hand. A lieutenant there whispered, "I tried to report this last year. Got reassigned to kitchen duty for 6 months. Traoré shook his head. "You did your part. Now it's my turn." Back in the shed, Traoré didn't sleep. He compiled everything: maps, bank records, engine IDs, voice transcripts, and most damning of all, a chain of deployment orders leading back to Colonel Diarra's office. He labeled the file Operation Hollow Shield, and then he made copies. 3 of them. One went to the Anti-Corruption Task Force, now with enough to trigger internal review. One went to a trusted journalist whose brother had died in a mysterious arms malfunction 2 years prior. And the last, he kept it tucked inside his vest pocket. For insurance. Within 72 hours, whispers turned to tremors. Diarra's staff stopped showing up to the officers' mess. A junior clerk leaked an email confirming unauthorized shipments labeled humanitarian aid. And then, the tipping point. A photo emerged on a private military forum. A smuggled weapon recovered during a rebel skirmish. Serial number visible. Clearly traced. Back to Western Depot 9. Traoré's post. The one they thought would bury him. But he had something they never expected. Patience. While they played games in air-conditioned rooms, he had spent months in dust, heat, silence, building his case, piece by painful piece. And now, the trap they laid for him had snapped shut on them. It wasn't a coup. It was a correction. And it began with a press briefing. Not held by Traoré, but by the investigative task force he'd quietly armed with truth. The room was silent as the lead investigator stepped to the podium. Behind him, blown-up images of documents, bank transfers, convoy routes, and weapon logs, all tied to names the country had once considered untouchable. At the top of every file, compiled by Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Colonel Diarra tried to flee that night. Too late. His convoy was stopped at a checkpoint he didn't know had changed hands. The guards saluted as he rolled down the window, then slowly drew their weapons. He was arrested without a word. When the news broke, even the state-run media couldn't spin it. Too many files, too many numbers, too many ghosts finally speaking. Traoré didn't gloat. When offered a press conference, he declined. When asked if he wanted medals, he said, "Let the families eat first." But the country responded anyway. Tens of thousands gathered in silence in front of the capital's gates. Farmers, teachers, soldiers, mothers holding photos of sons lost to smuggled rifles and political betrayal. And when Traoré finally walked through those gates, no uniform upgrade, no speech. They simply stepped aside. He didn't need a stage. He had the truth. Inside the command center, the generals who remained didn't stand. They rose. Because they knew this wasn't just a man who'd survived their trap. This was a man who dismantled it, brick by brick, while they still believed he was in the dark. A new security doctrine was announced days later. Strict transparency, independent oversight, full declassification of all past armory audits. At the bottom of the memo, a single signature: Acting Commander, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. He had not asked for the position. The army had offered it. Unanimously. And as for the shed, that rusted, forgotten warehouse where they once sent him to rot, it's now a memorial, a single plaque nailed to the steel door, where the truth was guarded and the lies fell apart. Because in the end, they gave him nothing. Not rank, not power, not favor. Only an empty shed, and that was more than enough.